The evening had started like any other in the grand, glass-walled restaurant perched on the top floor of the city's tallest building. The lights outside stretched like golden threads into the night sky, reflecting off the shiny surfaces inside. Waiters moved quickly, balancing trays of sparkling glasses and plates of carefully arranged food. There was an energy in the room that was both tense and polished, the kind that comes with people who have everything and want everyone to know it. Among all the staff, one young woman moved silently through the crowd, her apron tied neatly around her waist. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to be invisible. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes alert, and her hands steady. She knew that in this room, she was meant to serve, to notice only what was necessary, and to never make a mistake. She was small, slight, and easy to overlook, and she used that to her advantage. Tonight's event was special. It was a gathering of the city's elite, people whose names were printed in glossy magazines and whose faces belonged to the covers of luxury lifestyle publications. The tables were draped in pristine white cloths, decorated with tall silver candelabras. Plates gleamed under the soft lighting, and crystal glasses caught the light, scattering tiny rainbows across the room. The air was rich with the aroma of truffles and roasted meats, and the soft hum of conversation floated through the space. As she moved from table to table, serving dishes and pouring wine, her mind wandered, not about the guests or their wealth, but about the grand piano in the corner of the room. It was a magnificent instrument, polished to perfection, with keys that seemed to shimmer under the light. Her fingers itched whenever she saw it, a memory tugging at the edges of her mind. She hadn't played in years, not since life had forced her to set aside her dream of music for the practicality of work that would pay the bills. Yet here it was, in all its glory, just a few feet away. Her attention was caught by a group of guests laughing loudly near the center of the room. They wore designer clothes and expensive watches, and they spoke in a way that suggested they were used to being noticed. She served them with precision, pouring wine without spilling a drop and keeping her expressions neutral. But inside, she could feel the divide. They were living their stories, and she was living theirs. She was a shadow moving through their world, expected to be present but never seen. A guest complimented the presentation of a dish, and she responded with a quiet, polite thank you, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, hardly noticing her presence beyond the function she served. It was a familiar pattern, acknowledgement that never lingered, respect that was always conditional. She didn't mind. She had long accepted that her place was behind the scenes, unnoticed, a silent observer. As she made her way toward the corner where the piano stood, her steps slowed. She watched as a server lifted the heavy cover off the keys, revealing them gleaming in the soft light. The piano seemed to call to her, a familiar friend waiting patiently. She remembered the first time she had touched keys like these, the thrill of creating something beautiful with her own hands. Music had once been her world, her identity, her escape from a life that didn't always make room for dreams. But those days were behind her, or so she told herself. The orchestra of clinking glasses, soft laughter, and murmured conversations filled the room as the guests settled in. Waiters moved like clockwork, filling water glasses and taking orders, while the young woman continued her careful dance through the tables. She noticed the small gestures others missed, a nervous hand tapping the edge of a plate, a glance exchanged between two people who shared a secret, the way someone's shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of expectations. She saw people, even when they did not see her. She paused for a moment near the piano, pretending to adjust a napkin on a nearby table. Her fingers brushed against the smooth wood, and for an instant, she felt a spark of the joy she used to know. But the thought of playing here, in front of these people, made her chest tighten. This was not a place for a waitress to show talent. This was a place where mistakes were magnified, where social status mattered more than skill or heart. She shook her head and continued on, serving another table. From across the room, she noticed the Mactor D pacing, checking his watch and muttering under his breath. The scheduled pianist, a well-known performer, had not arrived. There was tension in the air, subtle at first, but growing with each passing minute. The staff whispered among themselves, exchanging worried glances. The guests, oblivious at first, began to notice the absence of music, a missing element that made the polished atmosphere feel slightly incomplete. The young woman felt a familiar flutter of nerves. Part of her wanted to step away, to focus on her duties as always. But another part of her, the part that still remembered late nights at a small upright piano in a tiny apartment, felt a pull she couldn't ignore. She knew that if someone didn't play soon, the event might lose its elegance. And she also knew that the piano was waiting. Her mind raced as she calculated the risk. What would happen if she made a mistake? What would the guests think if a waitress dared to play the piano meant for professionals? She could almost hear the laughter, the murmurs of surprise, the whispered criticism. And yet, the idea of not playing felt like a betrayal of herself. Music was not something she could hide forever, not if the chance was here, right in front of her. As she moved toward the center of the room, pretending to check on a guest's water glass, she felt her heart beat faster. The sound of her own footsteps seemed to echo, matching the rhythm of the music that was building inside her mind. The room was full of people who had everything, yet they were missing something essential, the raw, unpolished emotion that came from someone who played not for fame or recognition, but because they had to. She glanced at the piano again, and this time, she didn't step away. She imagined her fingers finding the keys, the sound flowing naturally, and the room falling silent in awe. She imagined the shock and wonder on the faces of people who thought they had seen it all. She imagined reclaiming a part of herself she had left behind. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. The Mactor D finally approached, his face tight with worry. He looked around the room, then down at the young woman. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a voice from one of the guests called out, half in jest, half in desperation, suggesting that anyone who could play should take the piano. The laughter that followed was polite, but there was a hint of challenge in it. All eyes seemed to turn toward her. The invisible waitress. She froze for a moment, caught between fear and the irresistible pull of the music. She could feel the weight of expectation, the potential for humiliation, and the thrill of possibility all at once. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision that would change the course of her evening. With her apron still tied and her hair neatly pulled back, she walked toward the piano, each step steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The room seemed to hold its breath. Conversations paused, glasses were set down, and even the staff stopped moving. She reached the piano and let her fingers hover above the keys, feeling their smooth surface under her fingertips. Memories of long hours of practice, of quiet moments alone with music, came flooding back. She remembered the joy, the frustration, the discipline, and the release. And then, with a steadying breath, she pressed the first note. It was simple, soft, almost hesitant, but it carried a weight that filled the room in a way that no words could. She continued, finding her rhythm, letting her emotions guide her hands. Each note was precise, each chord deliberate, yet there was a freedom in her playing that came from years of longing and unspoken dreams. The elite guests, who had been so sure of their world, were starting to notice that something extraordinary was happening. The music was no longer background. It was the center of attention, and it demanded it. The young woman, once invisible, was beginning to reclaim a presence that belonged to her. The restaurant, with all its grandeur and wealth, had become a stage for her story, and the piano was her voice. The evening that had started like any other was transforming into something remarkable, something no one in that room would ever forget. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she had never really lost her place in the world, only waited for the moment to step into it. The moment her fingers pressed the first notes, a wave of memories swept over her. She remembered the tiny living room in her childhood home, the worn-out upright piano her parents had bought second-hand, and the evenings she spent practicing long after everyone else had gone to bed. Back then, music had been her escape, a way to feel powerful when the rest of the world made her feel small. The smell of polished wood and the soft echo of the keys had been her sanctuary. Now, standing in a room filled with people who had everything she could only dream of, she felt that same surge of emotion. Her fingers moved with confidence, finding chords almost instinctively. Each note she played resonated in the quieted room, carrying a story of years she had kept hidden. She remembered how her music had once been a secret joy, something she carried with her through hard times, and now it was alive again, for everyone to hear. She felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. What if she faltered? What if they laughed or dismissed her? But the sound she produced was so true to her, so full of life, that doubt could not overpower her. The guests' chatter had dwindled to hushed whispers. A few heads turned toward her, their eyes widening slightly as they recognized the depth of skill in her playing. Some leaned back, unsure whether to applaud or simply listen, caught in a moment that refused to be interrupted. There was no pretension in her performance, no attempt to impress with speed or flashiness. She let the music flow from her heart, letting every note tell a story of longing, hope, and resilience. She remembered the sacrifices she had made, the nights she had gone hungry so that her younger siblings could eat, the jobs she had taken to keep her family afloat, the dreams she had buried beneath necessity. Life had demanded practicality, but music had demanded her soul. She had loved it too fiercely to let it die completely. Now, as her fingers danced across the keys, she realized that she had never truly abandoned it. It had been waiting for this exact moment. The first few notes drew a soft murmur from a group of guests seated near the center. They whispered among themselves, surprised at the elegance of what they were hearing. One of them reached for their glass, but paused mid-motion, caught in the spell of the music. The sound was intimate and powerful at the same time, a juxtaposition that left the listeners unsettled in the best way. It was not just technical skill, it was emotion, it was life itself, flowing freely from someone who had been invisible for too long. She let herself smile slightly as she played. It was not a triumphant smile, but one of quiet recognition that she had finally reclaimed something precious. She noticed the expressions of the staff around her, faces reflecting awe and disbelief. They had seen her work tirelessly, seen her move silently through the restaurant, and now they were seeing a glimpse of the person she had always been beneath the uniform. The admiration in their eyes was not for wealth or status, it was for talent, courage, and authenticity. Memories of her teachers from years ago surfaced. One had told her she had a rare gift, but life had gotten in the way of nurturing it. Another had insisted that she pursue music professionally, but circumstances had prevented her from following that path. She had carried their words in her heart, and now she realized that those words had never truly faded. The piano beneath her hands was proof that her talent had survived, unbroken by time or hardship. She paused briefly, allowing a softer melody to take over, one that spoke of quiet nights and small victories. The notes were delicate, almost hesitant, yet every sound was deliberate, filled with meaning. She imagined her younger self sitting on a creaky bench, learning scales and songs with stubborn determination. Those nights of discipline, frustration, and persistence had led to this very moment. She could feel the connection between her past and present, a bridge formed by the music that refused to let her go. The guests began to relax, their initial surprise melting into genuine engagement. Some leaned forward, captivated by the nuance and emotion. Others closed their eyes, letting the music carry them away from the opulence of the room into a place that was simple, pure, and real. The sound had stripped away the superficial layers, leaving behind a shared humanity that transcended wealth and status. One of the older guests, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, raised his eyebrows and whispered to his companion, "She plays like someone who has lived every note." His words, though soft, carried weight, and a ripple of recognition passed through the table. They were beginning to see what they had overlooked, the raw, unfiltered talent that could not be bought or faked. She continued to play, her confidence growing with each chord. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, but more importantly, they moved with feeling. The music was no longer just notes on a scale. It was a language, speaking directly to those who listened. She felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that she could communicate without words, that her story was being told through melody and harmony. The room, once filled with polite chatter and clinking glasses, was now alive with emotion, and she was at the center of it. She remembered the first time she had performed in front of an audience, a small recital in a community center. The nerves, the excitement, the thrill of sharing her gift with others, all of it came rushing back. She had been nervous then, and she was nervous now. But this was different. This was not a formal stage with applause guaranteed. This was a room of people who might not care, who might not even notice, and yet, her music had captivated them, had drawn them in, had made them pause and truly listen. Her thoughts drifted to her family, the people who had supported her quietly, without expectation. They had understood her passion even when the world had not. She played for them as much as for herself, letting each note carry gratitude, love, and acknowledgement for their sacrifices. The piano had become a vessel for all the emotions she had held inside, and it was releasing them in a way that words never could. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted subtly. The staff exchanged glances, recognizing the transformation. Guests who had seemed distracted or indifferent were now fully engaged, caught in the spell of her performance. The young woman noticed a few cameras discreetly raised, capturing the moment. She didn't mind. This was not about fame or recognition. It was about the connection that music could create, the power it had to break down barriers and reveal truth. She felt this sense of liberation as she continued to play. The years of invisibility, the quiet patience, the unspoken dreams, they all converged in this single experience. For a moment, she was not a waitress serving dishes or moving unnoticed through a crowd. She was an artist, a storyteller, a person fully alive in her element. The piano was not just an instrument, it was an extension of herself, carrying her past, present, and aspiration into the ears and hearts of everyone listening. A young child at a nearby table, who had been fidgeting with a toy, sat still, mesmerized. The parents exchanged a glance, realizing that their child was experiencing something extraordinary. The music had a universal quality, touching even those who might not fully understand it, speaking to the emotions that lie beneath the surface. She noticed the subtle change in the room, the way people's postures softened, the way their attention focused on something real and uncontrived. Her playing grew bolder, more expressive. She experimented with dynamics, letting some notes linger while others rushed forward, creating tension and release that mirrored the complexity of life itself. She imagined each guest as a character in a story, each note a sentence, each chord a paragraph. The piano allowed her to narrate without interruption, to share her journey in a language that transcended social barriers. Memories of hardships flashed through her mind, the long shifts in various restaurants, the exhaustion that came with invisible labor, the moments of self-doubt when she wondered if her talent would ever have a place in the world. Those memories no longer brought despair. Instead, they infused her music with authenticity and depth. Every struggle, every setback, had shaped her, and now it gave her performance weight and sincerity that could not be manufactured. The room remained spellbound. A few guests whispered to each other, acknowledging the surprise of discovering such talent in someone they had assumed would remain unseen. The young woman, focused entirely on the music, hardly noticed. She was in a zone where time seemed suspended, where the outside world had melted away, leaving only her and the piano. She felt free, powerful, and connected, not only to the instrument, but to every person in the room who was experiencing this moment with her. She allowed herself a brief glance around, noticing the subtle nods, the smiles, and the eyes filled with emotion. The crowd was no longer just a group of wealthy strangers. They were participants in a shared experience, moved by the sincerity and beauty of her performance. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that talent and passion could exist anywhere, regardless of background, and that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts are hidden in plain sight. Her music shifted to a more delicate, introspective passage. She thought of the nights she had practiced alone, the hours spent perfecting a piece with no audience but her own reflection in a cracked mirror. Those private moments had been her training ground, shaping her into the musician she was tonight. Now, the notes she had honed in solitude reached the ears of people who had never expected. The applause had barely faded when she realized that all eyes were still on her. The crowd had been captivated, caught in a moment that none of them expected, and she felt the weight of their attention settle around her like a warm, strange blanket. Her heart was still pounding, but there was a calm underneath it, a quiet satisfaction that she had done something she had never allowed herself to dream of in years. The Master D, who had been hovering nervously at a corner of the room, finally approached her. His expression was a mix of surprise, relief, and awe. "That was incredible," he said softly, almost as if the words might break the spell of what had just happened. He didn't need to say anything else. His eyes conveyed the message clearly. She nodded politely, keeping her composure, but inside she was still floating from the intensity of the performance. She returned to her station reluctantly, trying to regain the invisibility she had mastered over the years. But the guests now looked at her differently. A few whispered to one another, their eyes flicking to her with curiosity, respect, and even admiration. She had entered the room as a waitress, unnoticed and silent, and she had left a mark that could not be erased. There was a tension in the air, a mixture of disbelief and newfound respect, and she could feel it in every step she took. Her mind wandered back to her past, to the choices that had led her here. Life had not been kind, but it had been honest. She had learned the value of hard work, the importance of patience, and the resilience required to keep moving forward even when dreams seemed impossible. She had spent countless nights in small apartments, practicing alone, dreaming of stages and applause she might never receive. And now, standing in this grand restaurant, she realized that those dreams had never truly left her. They had been waiting, quietly, for the right moment. As she served the next round of drinks, she noticed a group of guests leaning closer to each other, speaking in hushed tones. They were discussing her performance, analyzing it in ways that revealed a genuine appreciation. They were not talking about the fact that she was a waitress or her social status, but about the music itself. Her hands had told a story that no words could capture, and the truth of it had reached them in a way that was impossible to ignore. She caught a glimpse of a young girl sitting at one of the tables, her eyes wide with wonder. The girl was captivated, completely absorbed in the reality of what she had just seen. For a moment, the waitress smiled inwardly. She had been that girl once, dreaming of the piano, believing in something larger than herself. Now, in this room filled with people who had everything, she was reminded of the power of possibility, the idea that even the quietest voices could make themselves heard if given the chance. The host of the event finally stepped forward, a distinguished woman with an air of authority. She cleared her throat, drawing the attention of the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the weight of command. "We have just witnessed something extraordinary." She paused, letting her words sink in. Talent and passion often go unnoticed, but tonight we have been reminded that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The crowd erupted into applause again, some of them rising from their seats, their faces alight with genuine admiration. The young woman, standing nearby, felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of pride and humility. She had never played for recognition, but in this moment, she understood the power of being seen. Her thoughts drifted to the challenges she had faced, the nights spent worrying about bills, the endless work in restaurants that left her exhausted but determined. Each struggle had shaped her, each disappointment had strengthened her resolve, and each small victory had led to this moment of undeniable triumph. She realized that her life, with all its hardships, had prepared her for this very instance, and the piano had become a bridge between her past and her present. As she continued her duties, she noticed subtle changes in the way the guests interacted with her. They asked questions, engaged her in conversation, and even smiled in recognition of her talent. She had crossed an invisible barrier, moving from the background into the awareness of those around her. The experience was overwhelming, yet grounding, a reminder that authenticity and skill could not be hidden forever. The evening progressed, and she returned to the piano several times, each performance a little more daring, a little more confident. She experimented with new melodies, allowing her emotions to guide her hands rather than her mind. Each note carried a piece of her story, a fragment of her journey, and the audience responded with genuine engagement. The music created a dialogue between her and the guests, a silent conversation that transcended words and social conventions. In a quiet moment, she reflected on the nature of talent and opportunity. How often had she been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated simply because of her role, her appearance, or her circumstances? Tonight had proven that skill and heart could defy expectations, that courage could transform an ordinary moment into something extraordinary. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet determination to continue pursuing her passion. No matter the obstacles, her performance began to draw attention beyond the restaurant. Whispers of admiration and wonder spread among the guests, some of them influential figures in the world of art and music. She noticed a few discreetly recording her playing on their phones, perhaps to share with others, but she paid them no mind. Her focus remained on the music, on the joy and fulfillment it brought her, and on the connections it was forging with those who truly listened. As she played, she imagined the life she could have led, had circumstances been different. The dreams she had set aside for practicality and necessity now felt alive, rekindled by the warmth of the piano and the validation of her audience. Yet she understood that the value of this moment was not in fame or reward, but in the realization that her talent and passion had never truly been diminished. They had simply awaited recognition, patience, and courage. The crowd's reactions varied. Some were visibly moved, eyes glistening with emotion, while others were quietly astonished, trying to comprehend how such talent had gone unnoticed for so long. Conversations among the guests shifted, focusing on her story, her skill, and the authenticity of her performance. The air was charged with excitement, curiosity, and respect, and the young woman felt a profound sense of connection with everyone present. She thought about her colleagues, the other staff who had watched her from the sidelines. They had always known there was something special about her, something that went beyond the routine of service. Now, they saw it too, witnessed by everyone in the room. The recognition was not just personal. It was shared, a collective acknowledgement of talent that had long been underestimated. The music she played was not just a performance. It was a declaration. It spoke of resilience, determination, and the quiet power of dreams that refused to die. Each chord resonated with her journey, Each melody reflected her experiences, and each pause conveyed the moments of doubt and hope that had shaped her. The audience, whether consciously or subconsciously, understood that they were witnessing not just music, but a life story expressed through sound. She paused briefly to catch her breath, allowing the final notes to linger in the air. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation, as if the room itself was holding its breath, unwilling to break the magic that had been created. Then, slowly, the applause began, soft at first, then swelling into a wave of sound that filled the room. She allowed herself a small, humble smile, acknowledging the audience's appreciation while remaining grounded in the experience. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt a shift within herself, the courage to perform, the willingness to be vulnerable, and the acceptance of her own worth had transformed her perception of herself. She realized that talent and passion were not dependent on circumstances, social status, or recognition. They were inherent, waiting for the right moment and the right opportunity to shine. The guests continued to discuss the performance, their conversations buzzing with excitement, admiration, and newfound respect. Some approached her to express their awe and congratulations, while others simply watched in quiet amazement. She interacted with them politely, her demeanor calm and composed, but inside she was exhilarated, aware that she had crossed a threshold that few ever reached. In the midst of the applause and admiration, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Every challenge, every disappointment, and every quiet moment of perseverance had contributed to this defining moment. The piano had become a symbol of her resilience, her dedication, and her unyielding spirit. She understood that this was not just a fleeting triumph, but a validation of her journey, a recognition that her dreams were not only valid but achievable. The evening continued, and she returned to her duties, but the energy in the room had shifted. Guests were more attentive, more respectful, and more genuinely engaged. She moved among them with a new sense of confidence, aware that her presence now carried weight, acknowledgement, and admiration. The invisible barrier that had separated her from the elite world of the restaurant had been broken, if only for a moment, and she felt a profound sense of empowerment. As the night wore on, she found moments to return to the piano, each time playing with increasing. The soft hum of conversation had returned to the room, but it was different now. People were quieter, more attentive, as if every word they spoke carried less weight than the music that had just filled the space. The young woman moved among the tables, serving dishes and refilling glasses, yet her mind remained partially at the piano. She could still feel the vibrations of the keys under her fingers, the resonance that had spread through the room and touched each listener in a way she had not anticipated. It was a strange sensation, to feel seen and heard in a world that had once ignored her entirely. Her colleagues watched her with quiet admiration. They had worked alongside her for months, even years, and they had always known there was something extraordinary about her, something that went beyond the uniform and the daily routine. Now, they were witnessing it unfold in real time, in front of people who had not expected to see anything remarkable from a waitress. She could feel their pride in her, a shared acknowledgement that transcended hierarchy and title. They whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that said more than words could. She returned to the piano when the maitre d' gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was an invitation, a suggestion that the moment was not over, that she had the power to carry it further. She sat down, the polished wood cool beneath her hands, and allowed herself to be fully present. The previous performance had been remarkable, but this time, she felt an urge to go deeper, to express something more personal, more intimate. Her fingers hovered above the keys, sensing the tension and anticipation in the room. As she began to play, the notes were softer, more tentative at first, weaving a delicate melody that spoke of vulnerability and hope. She thought of the long years she had spent honing her craft in silence, the nights of frustration, the moments of doubt, and the quiet triumphs that had kept her moving forward. Each chord was a reflection of those experiences, each note a testament to resilience and perseverance. The audience, sensing the authenticity in her playing, leaned in closer, drawn by the honesty and emotion that filled the room. She allowed the music to take on a life of its own, flowing from her heart through her hands and into the ears of those who listened. It was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation, a sharing of experience, a connection that required no words. She imagined each listener as a mirror of her own journey, recognizing their own struggles, hopes, and moments of quiet strength in the music she played. The atmosphere was electric, charged with emotion, yet grounded in the beauty of the simple, unadorned melodies that spoke directly to the soul. Her mind drifted to her family, to the sacrifices they had made, and to the unwavering support they had offered. Even when they could not understand the depths of her passion, she played for them as much as she played for herself, channeling gratitude, love, and acknowledgement through the keys. The piano became a conduit, transforming years of unspoken emotion into sound that resonated with the room. She realized that music had always been her language, a way to communicate when words failed, and now it was fulfilling that purpose in the most profound way. The guests' reactions were varied, yet uniformly respectful. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the sincerity and depth of the performance. Others were silent, mouths slightly open, processing the unexpected beauty they had witnessed. Conversations ceased, replaced by an unspoken reverence for the art that had emerged from an unlikely source. She noticed a few influential figures quietly exchanging glances, recognizing the rarity of the moment and the talent that had been hidden in plain sight. She allowed herself to smile faintly, not out of pride, but from a deep sense of fulfillment. For years, she had questioned her choices, wondered if the sacrifices she had made were worth it, and doubted whether her dreams would ever find a place in the world. Now, in this moment, those doubts seemed distant, almost irrelevant. The piano had become her voice, and through it, she had claimed a space that no one could deny. Her hands moved with increasing confidence, exploring dynamics, tempo, and phrasing that reflected the complexity of her emotions. She let the music swell and recede, creating tension and release, joy and melancholy, hope and introspection. The audience was captivated, fully engaged, yet she remained grounded, fully aware of the responsibility she carried with each note. Music, she realized, was not just about skill. It was about honesty, courage, and the willingness to share one's inner world. The young girl she had noticed earlier sat completely still, her eyes wide with fascination. She clutched her mother's hand, as if afraid the magic might vanish if she let go. The mother smiled gently, understanding that the child was witnessing something extraordinary, something that transcended age and experience. The piano had become a bridge, connecting generations and experiences, and the young woman at the keys was the storyteller guiding them all. She paused for a brief moment, allowing the notes to linger in the air, then continued with a more elaborate passage. Her fingers danced over the keys, creating a tapestry of sound that was intricate yet accessible, complex yet deeply human. She felt a sense of liberation, as if each chord released a fragment of herself that had been constrained for too long. The music was no longer just an expression of talent. It was a manifestation of her spirit, her resilience, and her unwavering dedication to what she loved. The crowd's response was immediate and heartfelt. Soft gasps, quiet exclamations, and murmurs of appreciation filled the room. Some guests exchanged glances, as if realizing that they had underestimated not only her skill, but also her courage. They had witnessed a transformation, a moment in which societal roles and expectations were suspended, and authenticity was allowed to shine through. The young woman felt a profound sense of connection with everyone present, an unspoken understanding that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the countless nights of practice, the work that had kept her hands steady and her mind sharp, the resilience that had allowed her to persevere despite challenges. Each struggle, each moment of self-doubt, each small victory had been a step toward this very evening. The piano had become a repository of her experiences, a vessel through which her story could be told without words, and she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the chance to share it. As the music swelled, she allowed herself to become fully immersed in the performance. She experimented with rhythm and dynamics, creating unexpected shifts that mirrored the unpredictability of life itself. She drew inspiration from her own emotions, allowing them to guide her hands and shape the melody. The audience responded instinctively, sensing the honesty and vulnerability in her playing. The room was alive with energy, yet there was a profound stillness beneath it, a shared recognition of the beauty and authenticity of what was unfolding. She thought of the barriers she had faced, the societal expectations and assumptions that had tried to define her, the moments when her talent was overlooked or dismissed. Now, those barriers seemed to crumble, replaced by an appreciation that was not contingent on status, wealth, or appearances. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition she received were not simply external validations. They were affirmations of her own worth, her own abilities, and her own courage. The music shifted again, taking on a more introspective tone. She allowed the melody to slow, to breathe, to carry a sense of reflection and contemplation. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful, and the audience was captivated by the depth and nuance of her expression. She realized that music had the power to transform not only those who listened, but also those who played, providing clarity, catharsis, and connection. She glanced briefly at the other staff, who watched with admiration and awe. They had seen her diligence, her patience, and her quiet determination, and now they saw the culmination of years of hidden talent and perseverance. Their silent acknowledgement was a testament to the shared humanity that transcends social divisions, a recognition that true skill and passion cannot remain invisible forever. As she reached the final passage of her performance, she poured every ounce of emotion into the music. The chords resonated deeply, filling the room with a sense of completion and fulfillment. The audience sat in rapt attention, fully absorbed in the experience, and when the final note faded, there was a moment of silence, heavy with reverence and admiration. Then, slowly, applause began to swell, soft at first, then building into a wave of sound that echoed through the room. She allowed herself a small, humble smile, acknowledging the audience's appreciation while remaining grounded in the moment. She had stepped forward from her role as a waitress and claimed a space that had always belonged to her. The recognition she received was not merely for her performance, but for the courage, passion, and authenticity that had guided her to this point. She had reclaimed a part of herself that had long been dormant, and in doing so, had touched the lives of those who witnessed it. As the applause continued, she felt a sense of transformation, a quiet empowerment that went beyond the performance itself. The evening had become more than an event. It was a turning point, a moment in which barriers were broken, assumptions challenged, and dreams validated. She understood that the true impact of this experience would. The room had changed. What had begun as a typical evening of polite conversation, clinking glasses, and careful attention to appearances had transformed into something almost sacred. Guests who had entered with casual indifference now watched her with a mix of astonishment and admiration. Every note she played carried the weight of her story, and the reality that a waitress, someone they had long ignored, could command such presence and skill sent ripples through the room. She returned to the piano again, feeling the eyes of everyone upon her. There was a thrill, yes, but also a responsibility. She knew that this moment was bigger than herself. It was a reminder of what talent, courage, and heart could accomplish, even when hidden for years. Her fingers hovered over the keys, sensing the anticipation in the air, and then she let the music flow, each note deliberate, expressive, and true. The guests were spellbound. Some leaned forward, silently absorbing every sound, while others closed their eyes, allowing the music to fill their senses completely. There was no chatter now, no polite clapping or forced smiles, just a deep, shared engagement with something real. She felt a sense of connection with everyone in the room, a bond formed through the language of music, unspoken yet undeniable. She realized how rare and precious these moments were, when walls of expectation and status fell away and all that mattered was the human experience. Her thoughts drifted to the young girl who had watched her earlier. She imagined her inspiration, the spark of hope and possibility that could ignite a dream in someone else's heart. That realization brought a quiet smile to her lips. She understood then that her performance was more than just an expression of her own story. It was a gift to everyone listening, a demonstration that talent could flourish in unexpected places and that courage could break through invisible barriers. As she played, she allowed herself to feel fully the years of hard work, the sacrifices, the doubts, and the fleeting moments of triumph. Each note was an extension of herself, each chord a reflection of her journey. The music spoke of resilience, of the quiet power of perseverance, of the beauty found in embracing one's true self despite fear or uncertainty. The audience, sensing the authenticity, responded instinctively. There were gasps of admiration, soft murmurs of awe, and occasional exclamations of wonder. One distinguished-looking guest, known for his influence in the art world, leaned toward his companion and whispered something that carried a mix of disbelief and respect. They were discussing the unlikely source of such profound talent. He had seen countless performances, judged by experience, technique, and presentation, yet nothing had moved him like this. She, a waitress, had captivated an audience that had expected to see only surface-level entertainment. Her music transcended all expectations. She allowed her playing to become bolder, experimenting with dynamics and tempo. The softer, more introspective passages transitioned into powerful, expressive crescendos. Her fingers danced across the keys, guiding the music through peaks and valleys of emotion. The audience was utterly captivated. Some shifted in their seats, leaning forward as if trying to capture every nuance. Others closed their eyes, surrendering to the narrative woven by her hands. Even the staff, accustomed to their role as invisible observers, watched with awe. The music carried memories with it. She recalled late nights spent alone with the piano, the ache of unfulfilled dreams, the quiet determination that had kept her going. Each experience, each obstacle, each moment of uncertainty was reflected in her playing. The piano had become a mirror of her life, echoing her struggles and triumphs. As the music flowed, she felt a sense of liberation, as if years of restraint and self-doubt were dissolving into sound. The room responded in kind, the listeners absorbing every bit of her truth. A woman at the back of the room, known for her influence in cultural circles, whispered to her neighbor, commenting on the depth of feeling she sensed in the performance. They recognized, perhaps for the first time, that true artistry does not rely on status, background, or recognition. It exists wherever talent and dedication are nurtured, and sometimes the most profound expressions come from unexpected sources. The young woman at the piano embodied this realization. As the evening continued, the young woman explored different pieces, each reflecting a facet of her personality and experience. There were moments of quiet reflection, passages that were tender and delicate, and sections of powerful intensity that left the audience breathless. She allowed herself to take risks, to play in ways that were both technically impressive and emotionally resonant. Each note was intentional, each pause meaningful, and the audience responded with attentive silence, broken only by the natural gasps and whispers of admiration. She thought of her family and the sacrifices they had made. They had always supported her, even when life demanded practicality over passion. She played for them as much as for herself, letting each note carry gratitude, love, and acknowledgement. The piano had become a vessel for her emotions, channeling years of unspoken feeling into a performance that resonated with every listener. She realized that the beauty of music lay in its ability to connect people, to communicate what words often fail to express. The guests' reactions were increasingly profound. Some were moved to tears, their faces reflecting deep emotion, while others simply stared, absorbed in the sheer brilliance of what they were witnessing. Conversations that had seemed important before now felt trivial. The music commanded the room, demanding attention and respect. Even those who had initially doubted her, who had underestimated her role in the restaurant, were forced to reconsider their assumptions. The young woman noticed subtle gestures of recognition from the staff and the maitre d'. They had long seen her dedication, her quiet talent, and her unassuming presence. Now, the public acknowledgement of her skill was a validation not just for her, but for those who had silently believed in her all along. Their pride and admiration were palpable, a quiet chorus of support that reinforced the significance of the moment. As she moved through a particularly complex section of the music, her emotions surged. She allowed herself to feel the exhilaration, the thrill of connecting with an audience in a way that had once seemed impossible. Every note carried intention, every chord conveyed meaning, and the audience was completely enraptured. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, a medium through which her story, her struggles, and her triumphs were shared with the world. The crescendo built, filling the room with sound that was both powerful and intimate. The audience sat in rapt attention, fully engaged in the narrative unfolding through the music. Each note seemed to resonate within them, evoking memories, emotions, and reflections. The young woman felt a profound sense of connection, an understanding that she was not only expressing herself, but also touching the lives of those listening. The room had transformed into a shared space of vulnerability, authenticity, and human experience. She allowed the music to flow into a more tender passage, soft and introspective. Her fingers traced gentle melodies that conveyed the subtlety of hope, the fragility of dreams, and the resilience of the human spirit. The audience responded with quiet reverence, sensing the depth of feeling embedded in every note. They were no longer merely spectators. They were participants in a moment of profound emotional exchange. Her thoughts drifted to the journey that had led her here. She remembered the countless hours of practice, the moments of doubt and fear, the sacrifices made to support her family, and the small victories that had kept her going. Each experience had contributed to the person she had become, shaping her skill, her sensitivity, and her understanding of music as a language of emotion. Now, through the piano, she was able to communicate all of that in a way that words could never capture. The applause that followed was thunderous, heartfelt, and genuine. Guests rose from their seats, clapping with enthusiasm and admiration. Some were visibly moved, tears glistening in their eyes. While others were simply stunned into silent awe, the young woman allowed herself a moment to absorb the response. Feeling a mixture of humility and exhilaration, she had stepped forward as a waitress, uncertain and hesitant, and had emerged as a musician whose talent and heart could not be ignored. She returned to her station, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. Guests who had once barely acknowledged her were now seeking her attention, complimenting her, asking questions, and expressing genuine admiration. Even the staff who had worked alongside her felt a sense of pride, witnessing the transformation and recognition of someone they had long known to be extraordinary. The invisible barrier that had separated her from the elite world of the restaurant had been broken, replaced by acknowledgement, respect, and genuine appreciation. The young woman realized that this moment was not just about the music. It was about courage, authenticity, and the willingness to step forward despite fear. She had reclaimed a part of herself that had long been hidden, and in doing so, had inspired others to reconsider their assumptions about talent, status, and potential. The experience was transformative, not only for her, but for everyone in the room who had been privileged to witness it. As the evening drew on, she continued to play, each performance carrying more confidence, more expression, and more